Mr. Chair, I appreciate the chance to take a very short call, and this one's directed to the Minister. I would like his response to a particular issue that following some of the social media traffic around this bill, and they are keenly watching the debate in the House tonight. There are two pieces of feedback I'm seeing coming through. There seems to be an adverse reaction to your references to Dave Dobbin. But secondly, an incredibly important point.
What's the member's view on Dave Dobbin?
An incredibly important point, and that is the definition around file sharing within the bill. And I want to go back to the original. The member may jest, but I do have an important point to raise. Originally in the bill, the definition contained around file sharing stated file sharing is where material is A, downloaded from the internet, or B, is made available on the internet by a user in a form in which the material may be downloaded by one or more other users, or C, is transferred directly or indirectly via the internet from one user to another user. So that was the original version or definition of file sharing. Under this definition, everyone who has ever used the internet probably by default falls under the definition of having shared files. But we do, of course, have a new definition, and that, after reading the Internet NZ submission, I'd have to say, other than the omission of the use of the word protocol from the original suggestion from Internet NZ, we have a very similar definition now in the bill. And that is, file sharing is where A, material is uploaded via or downloaded from the internet using an application or network that enables the simultaneous sharing of material between multiple users, and B, uploading and downloading may but need not occur at the same time. So as I say, a very similar definition to that worked through with the by Internet NZ, but with some caveats and some trepidation, I have to say. Their view was that more work needed to be done on this area, but I imagine for expediency, SID made a recommendation during their submission. But what I would like to request from the Minister is, given that Hansard, of course, will be used as a record going forward in the way that this bill is applied, in practical terms, could the Minister give his view to this House of the definition of file sharing, how he sees that definition being applied once this legislation becomes law and is enacted, and does he, for instance, believe that it includes an attachment to an email, or how far does his view of this definition go? I think clarification from the Minister would be helpful for this debate. I'm not going to give my interpretation because, of course, as a government minister, yours on Hansard and on record is going to be much more important going forward. So I look forward to hearing the Minister's contribution on that issue.
I call the Honourable Member Claire Curran.
Mr. Chair, so many things to say. I would like to address, essentially I want to address a couple of things. The Minister has opened a can of worms, essentially, when he talks about fundamental principles. And when he started off talking about principles and then basically attacked the members of the opposition. And then he talked about the fundamental problem with the Green Party. Well, I'd like to tell the Minister what the fundamental problem with the National Party is, and that is that you're full of hot air. That's right. And that the National Party is full of hot air, Mr.
That's
Chair.
Original.
Rhetoric that doesn't match the reality. And there are so many examples of that. And one of the examples that I'd like to bring to the attention of this House tonight, which has a core relevance to this debate, is the importance of investing in our heritage and in our cultural content, which is essentially the thing that we're trying to protect through this legislation, which is by providing copyright protection of the works created by the creators. And unfortunately, what this government is taking away the funding, the support base, and the confidence from our creative sector. And this is a great tragedy, and this is the awful rhetoric that unfortunately we're faced with by this government. And let's look at some of the facts. He gets up and attacks the Labour Party around Television New Zealand 7. Television New Zealand appeared before the Commerce Select Committee last week and told that committee, which saw through this legislation, did all the hard work, told that committee they were no longer a public broadcaster, that they had been instructed that they were a commercial broadcaster. And that's before legislation has even passed through the House, which disbands the charter, the public sector charter. So we're making Television New Zealand into a commercial broadcaster. There is no public broadcasting in this country. There is no investment by this government in cultural content, which this legislation is designed to protect. We're ring-fencing the funding for Radio New Zealand and squeezing it, the heart and soul of New Zealand, New Zealand's content. Mr. Chair, what the Minister has contributed to this debate is basically hot air. He doesn't understand the issues, and it's a pity that if it was the actual Minister who had taken this legislation through the House was getting up and talking about principles, maybe we could have taken them seriously. Because this legislation and Labour's support for this legislation is based on principles. Labour's support for legislation is always based on principles. And if we want to talk about the monopoly issue versus the failure of the market, which is essentially what is also underpinning this whole issue and is an issue which this government refuses to address, then I want to make some comments about that. And I actually would like to refer the House to another submission, which is a submission which is a very sensible submission, which was provided to the Select Committee by one David Farrar. And Mr Farrar, who I may not always agree with on a number of issues, actually makes some very sensible points in his submission around the research on economic damage that is being claimed by the many of the organisations, not the people who create content, but the organisations who represent them, the corporates, the monopolies that the member David Parker was referring to. And he said that some rights holders produce reports stating that the economic damage is in the billions, assuming every single download of a work is a sale that would have otherwise occurred. This ignores the fact that many downloaders try before that. Mr Chair.
Mr Chairman.
The Honourable Nick Smith.
Mr Chairman.